Hello, Dr. Lita Malek. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Steph. Thanks for having me on again.
I am so happy to have you back on because I was saying before we started recording, your podcast episode out of 400 and over 420 episodes at this point is the number one episode that I recommend to all sorts of people to listen to
Oh my
because
God.
it's so important and it's such a great resource. So that was February 2022 when you were last on the show.
Wow.
I
Oh
know.
gosh. Feels like yesterday. I can't. Time is, you could tell me it's February 2022 still, and I'd be like, oh, that's great.
Exactly. Yeah, time has flown by. So, in case anybody's listening and they're like, what was this episode about? We talked about injury rehab and return to lifting weights, and that was episode 362. So, I recommend this to a lot of people because I really do believe that scope of practice is extremely important. And though them listening to you on a podcast is not the same thing as working with you in person, I'm such a believer in, though I am a strength coach, I am not a physical therapist. I obviously cannot diagnose what's going on with somebody or even recommend a course of treatment for somebody to get back to the things that they love to do. And I know you talk a ton about scope of practice. So I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the things that you see now that social media has really democratized information. It's given people a platform, even like yourself, to share the things that you have as your expertise. But what do you see that I guess makes you kind of cringe a little bit, or why is scope of practice such an important thing as a DPT?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things is understanding what pain is in general. Like, just even if if I'm a PT, my job is to navigate people through the rehab process, help them through these injuries, pick apart the injuries, pick apart these pain generators, and narrow down on what exactly might be causing their pain, what factors are contributing to their pain. I need a strength coach or personal trainer to help me with the other part of the plan of care, which is things that they can continue working on, continue strengthening on when they're not in rehab. I only have an hour with them, maybe in some clinics, even less time. And that's once, maybe twice a week. You might get them the other one time or twice a week. It's so nice to have a cohesive team that actually ends up covering their base well. The issue with personal training and strength coaches, while some of them have incredible education, they actually come from some of them have PhDs in what they say, which is phenomenal. The issue is they just don't always study the injury process and pathologies to the depth we do. It's not in their curriculum. It's not something that they have to do, which is fine. But if you get someone with like a labral tear, and there's only so much you can do to modify through pain, which is I'm all for. If you're like, well, that's not too bad. Let's do this exercise for your shoulder instead, and then ends up being in a position that puts more load in a certain area of the shoulder, then we're into an issue. But if we would have worked with a physical therapist, you could kind of pick apart this, what paints the picture of pain, so that this person can continue to do the exercise as possible. So the scope just allows us, we both use exercise as our modality for the most part. We use some manual therapy, maybe the personal trainer or strength coach administers some stretches. That's fine. But there is a division where at that point we cover ours, you cover yours, and then that just makes a better client-centered care, I think, in my opinion. And I just see that in social media where it starts to blur a little bit. People are like, hey, if you have this pain, do this exercise. And it's someone that does not have the education in pain science or biomechanics or whatever. And then they're trying to tell someone to do an exercise around a pain that they don't know what it's causing. And then the caption has nothing to do with it. So there's just so much blurred lines. And it's like, okay, now we get a person with this injury who's desperate on social media. This is the worst case scenario. They do this exercise posted by a trainer or strength coach or whatever, makes it worse, comes to me, but I just learned this on social. Like, and it's the same for PTs and some chiros and whoever else is posting a little bit irresponsibly. But that's the big picture, is just knowing where your scope stops and where to reach out for help, because in the end, it's about them.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I appreciate that. And I always think, I think sometimes people get a bit frustrated with me when I'm sending them to people who have resources, people who are professionally trained in these areas, making those referrals, for example. And I think people get kind of frustrated because they just, they're not feeling well there. Maybe they are in pain or they're just feeling limited in what they can do as opposed to what they were doing before. And they just want a solution. And then to be told, well, hey, I'm not the person who can help you do that. And really, it's for their own benefit in the long run. I'm wondering if you can speak to maybe from a bit of the client point of view. I see a lot of one of two sides of, I think, what is the same coin. One side of the coin is I've been dealing with an ongoing thing. We'll just call it a thing in some joint or muscle. There's something giving me pain, and it's been for months or years. And I'm still just trying to push through it, figure it out myself, or just hope it goes away. On the flip side, we see sometimes people who have done their PT, they've worked with a really great person to help them rehab, and then they just don't know how to either take that next step and get back in the gym, or they are super afraid to do so. And they kind of linger in that liminal space between between the two, right? Where they've done their PT, but they're not getting back into the gym and sort of progressing past and having that bridge between. Can you speak to, from the client point of view, I guess, like being in one of those two places and how each person might take a step forward?
Yeah, I see this a lot too. And I think with the first case is this the person who's dealing with this ongoing chronic nagging issue that they've maybe tried to self-treat or not treat at all, hope it goes away, kind of two different things, maybe just push through it, modify. That case is something I see a good amount. And I always like to preface, like I'm in California. I think we get a fairly active population out here. And this isn't always the case. I always remind people that not every place in the US is someone that's has people that are as fitness forward or like just in that focus. But we get people here that are like already have their routine and they are set in their usual. I work out Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I do cardio Tuesday, Thursday, and that's fantastic. But sometimes that poses a limit when you have a chronic injury because you're just not used to something taking away from that routine for a little bit, which is a little side note on injury rehab. So you're doing something chronic, you haven't had someone actually look at it. It can be really eye-opening when you finally go get someone to look at it because maybe it's not anything that's particularly wrong, but it may be something to do with lifestyle modifications. Potentially, it's this random ache and pain for this underlying injury from a while ago that just gets exacerbated when life is super stressful, your sleep is crap, and everything just kind of falls off. Totally common. I think it saves a lot of time when you figure out what could be triggering it, whether it's something that's biomedical, so something that you're doing physically or a certain exercise. Maybe it's every time you average less than 5 hours of sleep a night and work as load is stressful. That is something that a physical therapist can help you tease out. If you finally go for this chronic injury or this nagging sort of random thing that's been limiting you, you get a better sense of how to manage it. And that's something I see all the time with patients. And they come in, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I have a better handle on it now. And it just doesn't take away from your life. And we refer to it as quality of life, but how much of your mind and how much of your time is it consuming when you don't know what's going on? And isn't that worth get checked out and getting an honest opinion on it? Someone that's not going to be like, maybe you need surgery or maybe you should try PT. There's tons of avenues. And I think sometimes people are scared of getting that because they think, well, what if they say I can't work out again? That shouldn't be the case. If you get a PT that's willing to work with you in your goals or a physician or an orthopedist, chances are they're going to set you up so that you can continue to do at least a good amount of things you like while we're addressing the issue at hand, the chronic case. I've been off for a little bit. I'm slowly trying to get back. I don't really know where to go from here now that I'm graduated from PT. Oftentimes, if you're lucky, I don't want to say if you're lucky enough, but if you're in a PT clinic that's willing to work with you through a certain amount of visits, sometimes insurance does pose a limit to this. However, for the most part, you should always be communicating with your PT about your goals. They should ask you. And if your goal is, I want to get back into the gym, and do a pull up and I haven't been able to because the shoulder has been an issue, that's for us to help. That's for us to put in our plan to get you there. And we're going to work with you, make sure that you're equipped so that when you go back, it's not as daunting. So it's ideally it's fluid with your rehab. You're doing your rehab for your shoulder or your neck, and then you start doing stuff for each of those body parts as you start to progress to that goal of a pull up. Once you're in that range, you can kind of fly solo and you can give it a shot. And so, really, the end of rehab is this blend of I'm mostly in the gym now. I'm not as focused on my pain. I actually don't really feel my pain. And you're just sort of what we call like flying solo, or what I like to call, I like to tell people, like, go for it, give it a shot for a month. Let me know how it goes. Your frequency of PT goes down. You maybe have been going once a week for the 3-4 months prior. And then you drop down to every other week, every 3 weeks, and then you check it out once a month. Now, time, luxury, insurance, like this is all, something to consider, but that's what it can look like.
Yeah, I appreciate you walking through both of those cases, and
Yeah.
I come across a fair number of both, and it can be hard when people don't know necessarily what is the next best step, or like you said, there's a fear behind them taking that next step. One of the things I hear super, super often working with the community that I do, which is generally over 40 women who have been athletic in the past or are newly inspired and motivated to incorporate more fitness into their life for whatever reason. One of the things I see a ton is this just overall apprehension about what if I what if I get hurt, or how do I start getting fit so then I can go to the gym and get fit? And I'm sure it's going to vary. There's so many factors here. But what are some of the broad brushstrokes that you see people need to think about as they're getting back into the gym, or they're kind of getting into the gym for the first time? Let's say they don't really have anything going on, but there's just this like, I don't know, now I feel like I'm not 20 anymore. Everybody keeps reminding me of this. I can see my gray hair, all of these things. And they're worried about keeping their body working as well as possible going forward. And so I guess it's kind of a risk to benefit analysis, but where do you see some of the best advice, or some of the things you'd want them to think about coming through?
I think you can, those are some of the most important things to think about as you're hitting an age where you're not feeling as confident going into the gym. I think it's important to understand three things. And the first is proper programming and proper instruction and consistency do wonders. And that's, I'll build on this in a second, but going to someone that cares about your well-being in the gym, and if you are someone that needs proper instruction, or if you're, think about the way you learn. If you need someone that's going to be giving you that one-on-one attention, go there, invest in that so that you can build confidence in doing certain exercises. Sometimes people will end up just dropping in a group fitness class, which is great for, just dropping in and schedule flexibility, but you don't get that one-on-one attention. And sometimes the classes are 20 people. And I see a lot of injuries in group fitness for a variety of reasons. But that's not to make people scared of going. It's just understanding that what you get with one-on-one versus a group fitness situation. And so for one, understanding, getting a coach that's invested in your well-being and cares, and that's someone that you can talk to about your goals and is going to be willing to accommodate you and set those modifications, because one, it's in their scope of practice, they should, but two, that they actually will take the time to do it. The second is understanding that this is important. You are at an age where after 29, our muscle mass starts to decline. It's just the natural progression of things, the way the body works. It's not as sprightly as it would be unless it's given the stimulus that it needs, which is the beautiful thing about skeletal muscle, is that it retains the ability to adapt. And which is so cool, because you'll see people in their 70s. I just started weightlifting and they're deadlifting, and people are like, oh my gosh, how are they doing that? You can still get strong. The issue is, I think we're made to believe that you're just supposed to get old and just be old and feel old. And I think that people need to understand that, look, this is still possible and it's important. So no matter your fear, understand that this should be a priority, so you make these efforts. The third is the basics. How do you get back into this? I think understanding that the body is adaptable, but it won't happen overnight. You can start with lighter weights with proper instruction. You can have that go up. You can start with certain muscle groups and certain compound motions versus individualized accessory motions or whatever, switch it up. That's for you and your trainer to figure out. Lots of levels to slowly easing back in to a workout program and slowly building from there because one, it's possible, and two, it's important. Now, I think the biggest thing is understanding that this is going to take time and it's never just about your workout routine. It's also about what you're eating. It's also about how you're sleeping. It's also about what you're believing about your body. And it's just all these, it's a big picture and it is a lifestyle step that after a certain age, it just becomes a little bit more of like, oh, okay, I need to focus on this more. Otherwise, yeah, we're not 20 anymore. And that's fine. That's a beautiful thing that the body changes. We just need to keep it strong because science shows I won't get into this, but so many benefits of resistance training and continued exercise. If it came in a pill, it would be the most popular pill on the market. And that's
If
my
if only it were that easy. Um,
gosh.
I think I definitely echo your sentiments there that when we are younger, we probably just have more leeway. We have more leeway to, as we say, fuck around and find out. And maybe when we're a bit older, we have more life stress. We have different, things going on with our bodies and our hormones are changing. We just may not have as much wiggle room or leeway to kind of leave things up to chance. And that's kind of what I hear you saying. Like you have to be strategic and mindful and use that hard-earned wisdom of life to help you move forward in a way that's going to, you know, you will be able to enjoy those benefits of training. Earlier you mentioned pain, and this is something that, again, I hear so often. There's maybe an existing injury or there was a particular thing that gave someone pain, and then maybe they went to PT and it got better, and then they're in the gym and they're doing whatever it is. And oh my gosh, that pain is back. And they are, of course, usually very nervous, very scared. And I'm wondering if you can talk us through a little bit about, I know this is extremely complex and there's probably, whole entire courses and dissertations on pain. But can you walk us through some of the, again, I guess like big picture ideas around pain? In other words, if
Yeah.
I'm experiencing pain in my shoulder, does that mean I've, irreparably damaged my shoulder? Might there be something else going on? What are some of the other factors that could go into my sensation of pain in my body?
Good question. I think with pain is, you can always think of it as a signal from the body, and it's a signal that's telling your brain like, hey, there's something going on. And it doesn't always mean, these are the big things, it doesn't always mean tissue damage, and it doesn't always match the severity of the injury. Everyone's had a paper cut before, hurts like hell, likely doesn't need surgical intervention. On the flip side, you can have an MRI with significant tissue damage in the knee. It can look pretty nasty in there. A lot of people don't have pain. So it's often a signal for one. So if you feel something, some of the building blocks to this is pay attention to it, try not to freak out. I know it can be a little bit scary, but understand that it's a signal and it may not mean that anything is actually wrong. But it is worth addressing early. Pain is a weird thing because it's an alarm system. If we tune it out, the body's just going to kind of work around it and take the path of least resistance. The issue with, I think, some people ignoring the pain is that if it hurts with emotion, say you have ankle pain or whatever, and when you ignore it, you go through your life. We use our foot a lot to walk around. You start moving a little differently to accommodate for the pain, and then you run into some other weird issues along the way, potentially. I think it's important to recognize that the pain that you're feeling may not indicate that something's wrong, but it is warranting your attention. So try to, if you can, pay attention to some data points, and that's how long it lingers, how, if it goes into the next morning, if it's more of a discomfort versus I can't move right now, something seriously limiting me. those are two different types of pain. Stretching past a certain point can feel uncomfortable, but having an actual ankle sprain can feel a little bit different. Those are very different injuries, but just getting an idea, I think you can consider how long the pain lingers, if it takes away from your life. If you're starting to pay attention to the pain more than your life, you should be getting it checked out. Again, it might not be anything, but it's better to know that versus live on this like uncertain, like, I don't know. And now I'm thinking about it all week and it's taking away from my workouts. I don't want that to happen. So that's one thing. The other types of issues are there's different kinds of pain. We have pain that's more of an acute injury, like you fractured your wrist or something. That's its own type of pain. You have neuropathic pain, so that's something that's more like sciatic discomfort of it's pain, it's tingling, it's numb, it's maybe like this deep, dull, diffuse discomfort versus a sore muscle or there's just sort of tender to the touch. Lots of different types of pain. So if you can figure out some of those data points, for one, it's good to tune into, but you can take that with you to your PT appointment or whoever you see for your pain or discomfort, and they can help you tease these out. So I think the building blocks with that is understand it's a signal, pay attention to it, try to live your life without aggravating it, but also go get checked out.
Yeah, thank you for walking through that. I know these questions because we're not necessarily honing in on anyone's specific kind of injury or pain can be a little tricky to answer, but I do appreciate you just kind of giving us these broad brushstrokes because I think again, it's just stuff that's on people's minds. They're like, "Oh, okay, I do wanna start playing pickleball." Or I hear this a lot, I'm starting to play pickleball." I haven't done any kind of exercise in years, but it seems much safer than something like strength training. Or, I'm scared to strength train because it seems so technical. But then, I'm gonna wholeheartedly go play pickleball and throw myself into it, and I'm not worried about that. So I think sometimes it's very contextual and very nuanced. When you're kind of talking to and working with people who are in the over 40 crowd like myself, what are some of the most common, I guess, body complaints that you come across?
I think the big ones I definitely see a lot of shoulder and neck pain. I also see back pain, SI joint stuff, and I think hip. Occasionally, I'll get some plantar fascia, but it's usually I find that secondary to something else, or the plantar fascia comes on, then there's like an accompanying hip or back pain. I often see like a couple spots with women in the over 40 crowd because I think most of the time they are doing something regular. They're pretty, whether it's life is keeping them active or they're busy. Like women are working and they're doing stuff, so it's never like, oh, I don't know, I was just sitting a lot and now my back hurts. Like these people that I see are typically engaging in a pretty active lifestyle, whether it's going on a regular walk or going to the gym. And so I find that sometimes it's a couple of spots that limit a few different things that they do. It's something in the workout or like when they're doing stuff at home, it comes on separately, but it's related.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things I hear a lot as well, I'm just going through like my mental Rolodex of things that people DM me.
Yeah,
But I think
love it.
it's a good talking point. There's this concept that, and I think we sort of touched on this on our last episode. There's kind of an old school
Yeah.
of PT or an old school of exercise and fitness
Mhm.
where the idea is if something's bothering you or you have an injury, you just need to stop doing every single thing. Just completely cease movement. And I'm sure this is also highly contextual, but how are newer schools of thought changing this and challenging this notion of, is it better to stay moving or is it better to stay put? How do we navigate that when there's something going on that's bothering us?
I think we're starting to learn more that exercise the and mental health and how heavily those two weigh in someone's recovery. We use the biopsychosocial model of pain. So that's the bio is the shoulder, the psychosocial is your mental health and social support network and where you're at with just in life and how much these play a role in your trajectory of rehab. And I find that I always like to remind people that, the only workout, I used to think the only workout was the one you didn't, the only bad workout was the one you didn't do. No. The only the bad workout that you did was the one that you, I don't know how the saying goes. What is the one you were unprepared for or underfueled for and then push through. Those are the workouts you want to sort of be mindful of. So while it is important to keep moving, I think we're pushing for people to do that. I'm really big on making sure that you're recognizing these different levels of fatigue, and pain, exhaustion, and reflecting on your sleep and your food as a part of that. But in the grand scheme of things, you definitely, usually, in the absence of like a fracture or broken bone, don't need to stop everything in the presence of an injury or a pain.
Mm-hmm.
I say or pain because not all pain means an injury. So you can feel confident in that. If it feels good, you can probably keep doing things, modify. We use the word modify a lot in physical therapy. And I think that's such a beautiful thing because there's so many variables you can mess with your workout to get the same thing done. If you can't do a bicep curl, you can try something else. If you can't do a shoulder press, you can lay on the floor and do a floor press, go lighter on the weight, maybe add some pauses, go partial range. There's so much you can tweak so that you can still feel productive. And I think that plays a bigger role in not only maintaining strength in surrounding muscle groups or the muscle group in question or the injury in question, but also for your mental health. If you're someone that needs exercise, and I see this all the time in clinic, someone will come and be like, look, I have this injury, haven't done anything, and it's taking a major toll on my mental health. Like I am not in a good place right now. Okay, let's see how you can keep doing all the things that fuel your mind and your body so that you can keep doing this. And I think it's something that we should probably spotlight more often. And we've trying to push that more as you definitely don't need to stop exercising in every way possible in the presence of an uncertain discomfort that you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I would imagine, and I can even think from personal experience of times in the more distant past where I would crash my bike or something, or hurt my back in the gym deadlifting, years ago, because I really let my ego get in the way, and it was sort of, let's just sit on the sidelines and do nothing. And I mean, dealing with that form, or that challenge with an injury or something like that, and just the athlete identity is one thing altogether. But like you said, that kind of, I mean, I can think about even days where I have the day off from training, or I'm just sitting more when I'm working. And I'm like, man, my back is getting sore.
Yeah.
I can tell I haven't been moving very much. And, you multiply that out, I guess, over months and years, which does happen in some cases when people have really gotten knocked off track by life and everything else. And I think sometimes from what I hear from people, it's just you kind of can get into this positive feedback loop of, now the less I move, the more things hurt, the more, it's hard to get around, and then I just don't want to do as much. So I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Some of the hardest things to do is get back into shape or like
Yeah.
start again. I always like to say, like, it's better just not to stop if you can help it. And even if it's something as minimal as like a deload week that ends up being deload season, that's fine. And as long as you're just going through something, just be okay with it. I find like we have two different identities. Often it's one that's like, please go do something, anything. I'm okay with that. And the other is like, okay, let's scale it back. Let's do the bare minimum because you're someone who needs to be okay with this. And I
Hmm.
think that tends to fall with the athlete identity a little bit more. We end up being very competitive. We feel like we need to continuously train at a level that's super intense to feel productive. And I think there's a bridge between the two is understanding what productive really means, and I think that's something we can all benefit from reflecting on. And that definition might change through life. Your productive workout when you're 18 is probably going to be different from your productive workout when you're 43. It's just different. It doesn't
Yeah.
need to be, but it ends up being at a certain point where you have to reflect, what are you training for? What are your goals? How does this play into what you want to do? And I always like to say, like, you can train hard. Like, you can absolutely be at a level and build to a spot. But when you're off for a certain season or whatever, you got to adjust.
Yeah, absolutely. Also really appreciate one of the many things I appreciate about you is that you take a really well-rounded approach to understanding what goes into somebody's, supporting somebody's body and their mind. Um, all of the things you talked about. You talked about sleep. You talked about deload, which is like my favorite word. I always try to get my lifters to usually more frequently deload than now that we're over 40. You are such a huge advocate for proper fueling and staying out of low energy availability and talking about red S and all of the reasons that can impact people. When you're pulling back and looking at the big picture, how do you start having those conversations with people? Because it can be so contextual and so it's like a messy ball of string, isn't it? You start pulling on one thing and you're like, "Oh, okay. So you're going through this really hard time and maybe you had something really stressful or tragic happen or like, oh, like you're not eating very much." Like how do you start to tease those strings apart when you're working with someone?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. That's honestly, I've learned, and this is not something I knew right away as a new grad. It was just like when you're a new grad PT, you're like, tell what's the injury? What are the tests? Like, you're just focusing on all the skills you've learned. And then after a little bit, you realize I personally think you save so much time down the line. The plan is so much more effective when you ask about these things early on and continuously check in on them. Because if someone's going through it and they're not eating well as a result or in combination, and everything outside of their injury is kind of a mess, if I'm just going to give them a home exercise program and be like, great, let's work your shoulder and rotator cuff with these 8 exercises, please do them 4 times a week or something that's a little heavy, and they don't even have the capacity to do it, that's going to get me nowhere, and that's going to get them nowhere. So I've learned to ask about this early on and check in with it frequently. For the most part, I can tell when something ends up changing in someone's life, and every few weeks, if I see them every week, I can tell. But I find that this is the building block, and the overlying picture is the fact that we need to exercise for life. And that's something that I think is really highlighted, specifically in women, as we are learning more about the body. The muscle mass changes at the bare minimum. We're talking about muscle mass. We're also talking about the heart, the exercise capacity. We're talking about bone health. We're talking about metabolic health. There's so much more to the picture that goes beyond just can you keep doing shoulder press for your quality of life. And so I think understanding that big picture first sets the foundation for, oh, this is how I should be viewing exercise and my injury and the ability to do it. It's not just about your end goal in the short term. This is about life. We're talking life right now. And I think it's just so huge. And when someone has that aha moment, they're like, oh, yeah, I guess that what I'm doing isn't sustainable. How are you supposed to keep doing this when life gets crazy and you get I mean, that's something. I'm in my 30s now, and I'm getting, my friends are having babies on one end, and I'm also going to funerals for the older generation on the other. It's weird. I'm at a weird place right now with understanding life, and it's very different from, I think, some people in their 20s. And you'll feel like you hit that at various stages. I'm like, all right, where am I at? Am I emotionally ready for this workout? Am I emotionally available to be in the gym at my hardest this week? And I joke about that, but it's serious. You got to be at a capacity where you're able to tolerate life stressors, physical stressors, mental stressors. And if you're not calculating your effort for that, something's going to give.
Mhm.
Injuries are very multifactorial. It's never one thing that causes, it's usually a combination of things, whether it's the capacity of the tissue to tolerate the load and not just the straw that broke the camel's back, or is it your 5 hours of sleep for the last 6 months and your stress, and how is that manifesting in the rest of your body? Are you also eating less? Is
Mhm.
what's the status of your hair, like, hormones wise? Like, everything is playing a role, and I think we just need to zoom out and recognize that we're working with a system and not just an injury.
Mhm. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, and I really appreciate hearing your thoughts on that. And the big picture is so important because we can't just isolate. You know, it would be one thing if we're, I don't know, we've got like a little mouse muscle hooked up to electrodes and we're seeing how it's moving, right? As we electrically stimulate it and we're like, a system in relative isolation. Even though there's some other things going on there too. But yeah, we're whole complete people with lots of
See?
different things happening and going on. And I really appreciate that about you, is taking that person-centered approach. I would love to now kind of shift and talk a little bit more about your newest project, um, which we were talking about before the call started, but your amazing new book called The Science of Stretch. Tell
Yes.
us what inspired you to create a book. Like I always say, a book is, well, maybe you don't know, in Lord of the Rings, we just, Boromir says, like, one does not simply walk into Mordor. One
Yeah.
does not simply write a book, right? There's a lot that goes into it. So, what inspired you to create this resource for people?
Oh, this is really interesting. So the book is called The Science of Stretch. It's about stretching and mobility in the simplest sense. And I did not wake up one day and was like, I want to write a book on stretching and mobility. That's definitely not how this happened. And I think that's a different route than some people have. This But the publisher, DK Books with Penguin Random House, has this amazing series called The Science of, and they've covered different topics. They've covered the science of running, science of yoga, Pilates, and most recently strength training. And I believe there's one other I'm missing. But they found me on Instagram and they noticed, the publisher reached out and he was like, hey, we like how you teach. Like, have you ever thought of writing a book? And I was like, is this a scam? Like, what are you talking about? We get all these emails. And no, it was legit. And then I said, no, I haven't. Like, what did you have in mind? And they mentioned they were hoping to focus on this next topic and this is their audience. And then initially I was on the fence because stretching is interesting. It's gone through a lot with the research. I'm sure you've seen it on in your world. But you get like two camps at this point. It's like stretch for everything or stretch for nothing. And I don't think I was at a place where I was like, ugh, do I need to? Not really, like kind of screw it. But I agreed to write this book because I get so many questions about this all the time. And honestly, I'm kind of tired of answering them. But from mostly, when I say not from patients, but like from my family, like, come on, guys, we've already talked about this. But we PTs get questions about stretching every single day because way back when the answer for everything was stretching. It was like stretch for muscle tone, stretch for this, stretch for that. And so I know that the research has changed a lot. And then in an effort to try to clear up some of the space and take what's such a like a mystery around stretching and the limitation that people have with approaching exercise right now, just all the barriers, I was like, you know what? This might be a chance to clear the air a little bit and get someone past this hump of anything and get them more comfortable to move their body and feeling like there's less mystery to it. Just have them feel more confident. So I took it from the big picture point of view. I'm a sports physical therapist. I love working with athletes. Like being on the field is my home base. I work with active people. This book may or may not help with that at all, but I thought, you know what, maybe this will help people. And so that's why I did it. And it was really cool because it gave me total freedom to put what I wanted in the book, provided we had to narrow down some things because I was getting really excited with all the stuff I could potentially add. The book is 224 pages. It's got some weight to it. I have it right here.
Show us. Oh,
This is
awesome.
it. And it's
Yeah.
not exactly a small book. And to the surprise of my family, I don't know what they thought I was doing. And I was like, I'm writing a book on stretching. And when they finally saw it, my mom was like, wow, it's got some weight. Um, but the book goes through how amazing the body is, what happens when we stretch. It really breaks down movement and anatomy and physiology to like take you away from like, this is just a stretch to, whoa, this is what's happening in the muscle. This is what my brain is telling my muscle to do. This is what happens when potentially my muscles change as I get older. There's a section on stretching and I should say healthy aging, which it's again, this book just doesn't, I feel like the books out there on stretching you might come across are very much like, let's do splits tomorrow. Like you can do that. It's just so like it's a lot. And like maybe what if I don't want to do the splits? What if I just want to know if I should stretch or not? um So this book tells you, it breaks down what happens when we stretch. It's not telling you to stretch. That's for you to make an informed decision on your own once you learn about what happens. And I think that provides just like the level of empowerment that I try to give my patients. And I think that independence of like, look, this is a tool. This is something you can take with you throughout your life. And it's got all these great dynamic stretches, how to make them static, basic mobility stuff. It breaks down the differences between flexibility, mobility, what it means to move through a goal versus just daily life. There's routines in the back for people who like to walk, people who like to run, and it breaks down like a dynamic warm up, what that looks like, a mobility advance, which is a little bit harder, hold it for longer. Yeah, that's a nutshell. I kind of just give a big overview, but I'm very
Yeah.
excited.
What a fantastic resource. Along those lines, when I think people are thinking about, again, being kind of over 40, they're like, all right, I haven't been doing much lately, or I have been doing a lot of training, but I have kind of fallen into that camp of, I don't need to stretch. I already have a million other things I have to do. If there's one piece of low hanging fruit off this tree I could cut off, it's probably stretching. What does science tell us about how our tissues are potentially changing as we're aging?
We know what happens to muscles as we get older. We kind of lose that mitochondrial density. It gets a little bit weaker, that we lose the sarcopenic situation becomes a little more in reach as we get older, and that's loss of muscle strength and muscle mass. Stretching, which is, I always like to, this is interesting because what we've looked at with stretching and general function, we typically look at how effective something is in helping someone live in life. And that's usually getting out in and off a chair, walking, gait speed. It's like basic needs for function. In the grand scheme of things, doing body weight squats, doing a basic quick mobility will get you through that. But I think our bare minimum and our baseline is changing. And this isn't quite reflected in the research because not everyone is participating in physical activity point blank. So I think for the active population, what if we don't want to just function and like get in and out of a car without pain? And like, what if we want to actually lift and move towards a goal? That's where I think you can zoom out because on the basis of stretching and general function, yes, it can help. There's certain areas, certain muscles, for example, like the calf and the hip flexor, stretching those regularly can help someone that's older maintain their gait and like little things like that. But I think as you get older, the biggest thing is what goals are you working towards and how can you supplement those goals? The biggest benefit we're looking is definitely the biggest bang for your buck is cardio and resistance training. We know that. Those are the big ones. Flexibility, I think, to supplement whatever those activities are, is going to be the kicker. Because yes, you can strength train through full range of motion to maintain that flexibility. But guess what? Strengthening through full range of motion is pretty hard. And the muscle is weakest at where it's most lengthened. So doing a like a deadlift at its greatest depth is going to be harder than going halfway by design. So if you can't actually reach that and your goal is to get more flexible in that range, you might need to consider other options. And that's where stretching can actually come into play. And so I like how this is able to supplement that. And I think that's something that you can consider when you're doing your workouts is whether or not the stretch is going to benefit what you're about to do. Generally, a dynamic warm up involves dynamic stretches. And I think people forget that stretching isn't always static, it's dynamic. You can have active, your muscles, anytime your muscle lengthens past its resting load, it's without an added weight, it's going through a stretch. So pushing on a hamstring stretch versus doing a deadlift, you're still stretching a muscle at a certain capacity. So I think it's the big picture is what do you want to do? And do you have the range to do it? And if you don't, here's some tools. But also, if you do, here's some tools.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one of the other places people get a little bit stuck is they do want to include some amount of dynamic stretching or mobility work or whatever it happens to be, but they have been led to believe that any kind of stretching prior to lifting is going to affect the muscle's ability to produce force and basically lift heavy. Um, what do we know about that? What is the real answer there?
The real answer is for, and I think this is studied in mostly somewhat active people, so always take that with a grain of salt. But what we know is static stretching is going to be holding it past a point of 60 seconds or 40. You're hitting the 35 to 40. Dynamic is anything underneath that. So static stretching, holding that stretch might diminish power performance. However, it's usually pretty small in the way that it actually happens, and it's mitigated with a supplemental dynamic warm up. That's it. So if you want to stretch before it feels good, feel free to do it. It's not going to kill your performance likely that much. As long as you're doing a dynamic warm up afterwards. If you don't want to risk that, you can do a dynamic warm up prior without stretching. But I would recommend, if you're trying to hit ranges in an exercise, or you lack a certain range of shoulder mobility or hip mobility, and it helps you to get to that range to achieve an adequate dynamic warm up that matches up with the activity you're about to do, then I might supplement that. And it doesn't need to take long. That's the thing. Like, this stuff can take 15 minutes if you're going for just basic prep. Now, if you wanted to train flexibility on a different level, that takes a little bit more dedication, a little more time. But for as far as pre-lift, you're not going to detract from your performance very much if you partake in some stretching.
Mm.
And on the other hand, if you don't have any underlying issues and you don't have time to stretch, you can skip it. You can go into the light. I would just recommend doing a light warm up of just lighter sets of whatever you're going to do, just to prep, so you're not going from 0 to 100 right away.
Yeah, that's great advice. Very, very, very solid, very
There's
measured
things we
advice.
know about the muscles as it ages and power production. And if you, most people have some level of tendinopathy that does better with a warm up, just little things like that.
Mhm.
Bias me towards make sure you get a warm up in.
Yeah, do those lighter sets at your lighter RPEs. Get ready, prep, even just to keep the bar moving along a
Yeah.
decent path. If you load that bar up super heavy, you haven't done any warm up sets, it's gonna be a rude awakening. Um, I guess the last question I have for you is, if you had to pick three of your favorite flexibility exercises or stretches, what would be kind of your all-star team of, like, I know this is hard, like, but three, if somebody is super crunched for time, or you just want to give them the best of the best?
um, if I'm looking at actual dynamic stretches, and sometimes my dynamic stretches and my lighter warm up sort of mix, because I'll end up doing like a lateral squat and then I'll hang out there for a little bit. But some of my favorites, world's greatest stretch, that always feels great. It's very, you get everything in there, and I think it's named that with, so it's got something to back up the name. I think it really hits everything. And if you haven't seen what a world's greatest stretch is, you're in like a deep lunge position. You're reaching one arm down and you're reaching up to rotate. So you're getting spine, you're getting hips, you're getting chest, pecs, you're getting ankle and calf in the back. So there's one. I also kind of like a garland squat to hang out. And when you come down into a deep squat, you kind of shift around. But I like to pair that with coming back up and making that dynamic, because this is me when I do more lower body. And I also, thread the needle is definitely a favorite. I think that feels good for just about anyone that does it. um, that gets upper body rotation. And if you don't want to do that, and if you want something that's a little more static and slower, the pretzel stretch is also really fun, where it's kind of like a book opener with an added pull with for the quad, and then your neck can be facing either direction. You're opening up the chest. These are all in the book too, if you're curious as to what the heck these are.
Mhm.
Um,
We'll link all that up.
and I think a classic that pretty much always feels good is a child's pose stretch.
Mm.
Child's pose is nice. I think those are the main ones. Yeah, if I had to consolidate.
That's a pretty solid roster right there. I guess I do have actually one more quick question. So one of the things that my lifters find is challenging, especially if they've come from 5 days a week of a CrossFit style training. And I'm not picking on just CrossFit here, but any kind of circuit style training, Metcon style training, where they are constantly moving. There is barely any rest. And then we're moving them toward a strength training session where they've got 2 to 4, maybe 5 minutes between their heaviest set. I mean, there's just more time to sit around and not do a lot. One of the things I have to sometimes pull people back from is wanting to do all sorts of things in their rest periods, intervals, I mean, you name it. What are your thoughts on doing some light mobility work or stretching between these like heavier sets where we're kind of resting to regenerate ATP, and that sort of thing? What do you think?
I think there was a study that showed that if you do stretch between sets, it might be beneficial or it does nothing.
Hmm.
Those are the two things. So I think if that's something that you feel like it's getting tight, hitting a dynamic, it doesn't even have to be dynamic, just be a short static stretch on the lower side, 30 seconds between sets should be fine. I would just consider how fast the movement that you're planning on doing, whether it's does like a power exercise, are you benching or are you throwing medicine balls? Maybe consolidate if you're working with that and you're resting between those sets. I would keep the stretch a little bit shorter just in case you are dabbling in that power loss
Hmm.
of production. But I
Great.
think I think it's a nice way to make them down if it's not going to affect their exercise. So
Yeah.
abs if you're doing upper body, it's fine. Take time.
For sure. Yeah. I think, I'm always that I learned how to lift with, I mean, we had social media, but it was a lot harder, I feel like, to get lost in our phones and things like that. And so I don't really have a problem setting the timer on my phone and then, oh, timer goes off, like it's ready for me to get up and lift again. But I know that it can be so hard for people to sit and there is this element too of feeling like I'm being lazy, right? I need to be productive. And we kind of touched on that with athlete identity. So yeah, if I guess people can do some light mobility work or some dynamic stuff in between. If they feel like they just have to do something, it's probably better than doing a bunch of things that are only furthering their fatigue.
Right. I think this is, and I always like, this is what I mean with you got two types of people. I mean, obviously many more, but two main types of people in the gym. The one that's potentially scared of doing it, and this is what I do. And then you get the athlete that cannot stop moving and only feels productive if they're like completely exhausted after their workout. It's not it. That is not it. And that is so not where we're at in 2023. And there's still some coaches out there that don't think that. But the reality is, you got to recognize where rest and recovery comes in, and you have to consider, zooming out and looking metabolically, you have different energy systems that take you through these workouts depending on which workout it is, whether it's a cardio or you're doing sprints or you're doing something like a bench press, and recognizing where the rest level plays a part in helping you do this better. And I think people forget, it's like, oh my gosh, I gotta rest, oh no, like I have to keep moving. No, this is actually for your own good. This is
Mhm.
for making sure that next set comes out on top where it's supposed to be and you're not just completely depleted. And then you get the other side of the spectrum of now you're just running on high your whole workout and then you're overtraining or overreaching and then that can trickle into other effects. But
Yeah.
it is like psychologically like being okay with rest. And sometimes I challenge my athletes too. I'm like, no, do nothing. Like
Mhm.
I need you to just sit for 30 seconds. You're gonna be okay with that. Let's embrace this. And that's
Yeah.
a type of exercise.
Yeah, I find it a little bit too it's hard to get people sometimes to understand the utility of and the necessity of different rest periods, especially with energy systems, because you could do a pretty heavy set of 5, say deadlifts or back squats or benching or whatever you're doing, and it was hard, but you don't have the same sensations in your body. You're probably not profusely dripping with sweat. You're a little bit out of breath, but it's nothing like you're doing a hit workout. And so the sensation is, I don't even really feel like I did very much. And now you want me to sit and do nothing? So that's a tough one, especially at first. I
Yeah.
feel like to overcome that, but you said it well.
You gotta be okay with it and recognize where rest comes in between sets and
Hmm.
outside of the workout. And
Yeah.
I think you gotta consider like what you're trying to do too. Like, what is this workout today? Is it a strength workout or are you doing a circuit? Are you doing a hit workout where you're actually having, these are all different types. And I think accommodating that and recognizing demonstrates a level of literacy and your ability to to coordinate what your body is doing throughout your workout and do this, like I said, big picture for life. It's so much more than just like, okay, now I'm resting. No, I have to do 10 jump squats while I'm waiting.
Thanks so much for walking us through that. I really appreciate it. Remind us again the name of your book, where people can find it, and how they can follow along with you on social.
Name of the book is Science of Stretch. It's from DK Books. And let me show you a peek on the inside actually before I go. There's a lot on physical activity guidelines and like general stuff too. But for example, you're getting these beautiful
Wow.
images that were once images of me that I had to send in. But you're looking at all this different mobility and just dynamic stretches, what's actually happening when you do it. So cool. So this is something that you can find. It's available pretty much anywhere at this point. Penguin Books on their website will tell you where the Amazon, Walmart, Target, Barnes and Noble, Powell's. It's in a lot of different places, but you can find it if you just type in Science of Stretch. You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Malek PT, DRMALEK PT. And that's also my website, and TikTok and Pinterest and Threads and all the stuff. Not really on YouTube yet. I need to get better about that. But for now, that's where you find me. And the book
Yeah.
is available. I grab it for yourself, for a friend. And honestly, it comes in the series. So if you know someone that likes running, that likes yoga, get them both of them. They're such a cool book to have. And everyone this apparently it's been a really killer white elephant gift that's been stolen a bunch of times, multiple. But yeah, gifting this is, I think it's such a good idea, not because I wrote it, but because it just allows people to like, oh, right, okay, I'm going to start moving. And
Hmm.
it's just such a gateway to more activity.
Yeah. I was also going to say, if you own a gym or coach at one, get a copy for your
Yeah.
gym.
Oh
If
my
you
God.
have clients that you work with, get them a copy. It's something that really can be such a great resource for so many people.
There's a section on bony morphologies too, and like when not to stretch. So when you're talking about like hip impingement or cam lesions or pincer morphologies and arthritis and like bunions, there's a little bit on that too. So you get an idea of like, oh, this might be limiting someone's
Mm.
mobility or someone who's never been taught anything about it.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on doing
Yeah.
such a huge project. I appreciated how you were sort of like, surprise, here it is. Here's ready. And so I know how much work goes into that sort of a project, and you are to be commended for undertaking such a project. But super appreciate everything you do. Your Instagram, like I said, the podcast episode we did. I am constantly sending people to you. You're such a
Oh,
wealth of information, and just doing such great stuff out there in the world, having these nuanced conversations, looking at the multifaceted nature of all of these things. And I think you're just an absolute gem to do the work that you're doing. So thank you.
I appreciate you doing all this in this space. God, it's so needed. So I very much appreciate you, Steph.
Thanks for being here.
No problem. Thanks for having me.